Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and we are going to continue talking about personal safety and survivors. That's the series we've been exploring the past several weeks, but this is a different perspective. Today, I am really lucky to sit down with Nicki Weisensee Egan. She is the investigative crime reporter who first broke the Cosby story despite the professional and personal risks.
We were getting letters from Cosby's attorneys threatening to sue us. I was getting phone calls from his attorneys, Marty Singer, nearly every day, threatening to sue and just trying to get me to back off the story. And then a negative story about me was printed in the local newspaper, Philly Weekly. The DA was threatening to have me arrested for some of my stories. So it was really coming at me from all sides, but I believed the victims. I wasn't going to back down. And it didn't stop me from pursuing the story. But, when this all resurfaced 9 years later, and all of a sudden the media is jumping in it and they're like letting the victims tell their stories, it made me very leery of the media.
I was lucky enough to meet her and two of the Cosby survivors, Therese Serenisi and Tamara Green, at CrimeCon just a few weeks ago. And it's there that I met Nicki and invited her to be on the podcast. So it's really exciting to have made that connection and then see it come to fruition. Nicki wrote a book, Chasing Cosby. It's honestly the definitive guide on the Cosby crimes, survivors, and her journey of the personal impact and really the ethics of journalism and how she told that story over many, many years. That book came out in 2019. Then she hosted a podcast of the same name in 2020, also Chasing Cosby. You'll hear a trailer for that right after this intro before the interview begins. And we also discuss her most recent book, which just came out this month, Victim F, which she co-authored with survivors Aaron Quinn and Denise Huskins. You guys, that story is a mind you-know-what. It is unlike anything I've ever heard. Also, just a trigger warning for anybody listening who might be sensitive to topics around sexual assault. There is quite a lot of that in this episode. Thank you so much to Nicki Weisensee Egan for killing the small talk.
I survived being drugged and sexually assaulted by Bill Cosby.
Drugged and sexually assaulted.
Drugged and sexually assaulted.
Sexually assaulted.
Assaulted by Bill Cosby.
At that time in 65, I was 17.
Why did you do this to me, Mr. Cosby?
For nearly half a century, Bill Cosby led a dark, secret life, preying on women.
During this mentoring process, in preparation for my guest starring role on The Cosby Show, he groomed me and he drugged and raped me.
He slowly and carefully coaxed each one into feeling safe and cared for, and then left them to pick up the pieces of their lives. It all started with Andrea Constand. She carried the burden of being the only one of the 60-plus victims whose case could be tried in a court of law.
It was not going to be easy to come forward and to say the truth about what happened to me. But I was really fighting for many others as well.
I consider Andrea Constand to be the Joan of Arc in the war on rape.
This is part of the age of empowerment of women. It's what we call the reckoning.
Bill Cosby, 3 words for you. Guilty, guilty, guilty!
My name is Nicki Weisensee Egan. I've been the lead investigative reporter on the Cosby case since the first day it broke in 2005. Cosby is now behind bars and still maintains his innocence. In this new 6-part podcast, the jurors, the attorneys, the families, and the survivors are finally getting their chance to speak out as one.
My name is Tamara Green.
My name is Shalon Lasher.
Stacey Pinkerton.
Therese Serenisi.
Sunny Wells.
Lisa Lott Lublin.
PJ Maston.
Beth Ferrier.
Jennifer Kaya Thompson.
And in her own words, Andrea Constand is telling her side of the story.
At a certain point, I realized that this was going to either take me down or it was going to take my perpetrator down.
This is Chasing Cosby.
Okay, Nicki, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you about your career, your books, podcasts. There's so much. So thank you for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I was, really thrilled to meet you at CrimeCon and honored to speak and meet the survivors that we teamed up with to talk to the virtual audience. It was Therese Serenisi and Tamara Green. It was just amazing to get to meet them because you've been championing their stories as well as most of Bill Cosby's accusers and victims. And what I didn't know when I met you was that you were also co-authoring Victim F, which is the story of two other victims, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn, and the almost unbelievable story that they endured. So there's two things I really want to get into with you. So maybe we can start with the Cosby story and a bit about how you began covering it and your work as a reporter.
Sure. When this story first broke in January 2005 in Philadelphia, I was a crime investigative writer at the Philly Daily News. And my boss would always pretty much assign me to the big crime stories to kind of get ahead on them and dig into them. I had just spent a year and a half digging into sexual misconduct among the ranks of the state police, and I'd done an expose on drug-facilitated sexual assaults that were on the rise in Philly. So I was sort of uniquely qualified to take this on. However, I was also a Cosby fan when this broke. I grew up watching Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids on Saturday morning cartoons, and the Cosby Show was, my favorite show growing up. It helped me through some rough times, which I write about in the book. So my initial reaction was not the cause, but as I always say, my job as a journalist is to put aside my personal feelings and try to find out the truth. So that's what I did.
Yeah, well, you're touching on a lot already. So one is you're uniquely qualified in many ways. It's Bill Cosby and his show and his work impacted your life personally. Plus, you have your master's in criminal justice. So it really uniquely positioned is almost an understatement. How did you separate all of that and do the work? I mean, you just touched on it, but really, what was that process like?
It touched me personally because of my own brother dying when I was a teenager. And I used to watch, the Cosby Show debuted my senior year in high school.
Yeah.
When it was a few months after he died. And, I would sit there and watch Cliff and Theo work out all of their problems together and would kind of wish that my father and my brother had been able to do that before he died, and they weren't. So it was just a safe place for me to go to when my entire, home life was just in chaos because of my brother dying. So that's why, it helped me get me through some very rough times. And because supposedly it was based on Cosby's, real life.
Right.
I thought that a lot of that was true because, of course, he did have a son named Ennis, and he often said that he based that character of Theo on his son. So that's the way I meant that helped me through this.
Right. And, that kind of gets into this other theme that I'd love to explore with you. It's how do we separate the art from the artist when the artist has become a criminal? And I don't know, since we're here, why don't we start with that? How do you view his work now, knowing more intimately than so many people the diabolical things he's responsible for?
Well, I think the first thing you have to acknowledge is that Cliff Huxtable is a fictional character. He is not Bill Cosby himself. Yeah. And you can watch the show with the eye toward, it was a great show. And, I write about in the book, I was channel surfing and found it when I was working on the book proposal, that episode where Theo gets diagnosed with dyslexia. Yeah. So, and I came across that. It's a pretty famous episode of Theo being diagnosed with dyslexia. And that really, truly was based on Ennis's situation. So anyway, I would just caution people to understand that show meant so much to so many people, in particular Black Americans. And I understand that, but just remember, he is a fictional character. Cliff Huxtable is not real. Cliff Huxtable is not Bill Cosby. And real Bill Cosby is someone that we just never could have imagined he was.
Right, which is maybe why it's a little easier, not that it's easy, than, say, Michael Jackson, right? Separating his music now from the allegations, at least, is difficult because he wasn't playing a character. He is Michael Jackson. But that's a good point, to distinguish the reality from the fictional show. But your book, Chasing Cosby, is as much about the ethics of journalism and how we report these really sensitive stories. So you were the first to start following this, and you followed it, relentlessly. How scary was it being among the first to publish these stories, even though you were going through all the proper channels, editing, verifications, fact checking, was it just kind of terrifying being alone out there talking about America's favorite dad, as your subtitle calls him?
I wouldn't describe it as terrifying as much as I would describe it as nerve-wracking. Because the one thing I didn't expect was for the rest of the media to turn on me. And so I particularly thought that would happen after I found out there was a second accuser, Tamara Green. And I completely did not expect that there would be more women. I knew there was this one victim at Temple, and I just thought, okay, that's it. But then when Tamara Green came forward and I told her story, exclusively on the cover of the Daily News, I thought, okay, now everybody's going to jump in on it. And sure enough, like, more victims did come forward after that. And the news media did jump in, but they jumped all over her and they jumped all over me. I was going all these national shows, and it was a really unsettling experience and very disillusioning, because I was lucky enough to work for a newspaper, the Philadelphia Daily News, that never backed down to anybody. And I say to this day that there was no other news organization in the country that would have let me pursue this story the way the Daily News did in 2005. And I've had more recent experiences that prove that to me even more. So I had their backing, and they never swayed from that. We were getting letters from Cosby's attorneys threatening to sue us. I was getting phone calls from his attorneys, Marty Singer, nearly every day, threatening to sue and just trying to get me to back off the story. And then a negative story about me was printed in the local newspaper, Philly Weekly. The DA was threatening to have me arrested for some of my stories. So it was really coming at me from all sides, but I believed the victims. I wasn't going to back down. And it didn't stop me from pursuing the story. But, when this all resurfaced 9 years later, and all of a sudden the media is jumping in it, and they're like letting the victims tell their stories, it made me very leery of the media. So it's like, I watched how they jumped on the Cosby accusers bandwagon in 2014. They could just as quickly jump off again. Right. So it just made me more determined than ever to just stick with it, because I really felt like things could turn again. And then the women would just be, piled on again by the media, which is what happened in 2005.
It's wild to me, because that's only just over 15 years ago. It's such recent history, and the fact that there was such a shift in that decade, what do you attribute that to them coming around, other than probably seeing a lot of your work bearing out to be true? But it seems like right now there's much more of a willingness to believe women. I know we have a long way to go, but what else do you think happened in that 10 years?
Well, the biggest thing that happened was social media. Social media did not exist in 2005. The only thing there was Facebook, and that was, you had to have like a college email address to use it. And the websites of news agencies were in their infancies. Some would argue many still are, and I would argue that. Right. So that was the big change, because when this first went viral, it was a video of a comedian, Hannibal Buress, a Philly Mag reporter, had been at a Philadelphia appearance of his, and he started talking about Bill Cosby. So the reporter started recording with his iPhone, and it was this whole bit about, Bill Cosby's a rapist. If you don't believe it, go Google it when you get home. And Dan McQuaid posted that on his on Philly Mag's website on a Friday, and Monday, Gawker picked it up, and all these other news organizations did, and it started going viral. And that was another big change. Not only was there social media, there were news organizations like Gawker and so forth that were purely online, that did not exist in 2005. And they just were not at all shy about questioning the great Bill Cosby. Whereas the mainstream media was still very, very cautious about going after him. And in fact, they didn't start jumping in for another few weeks until new accusers started coming forward. So there was still this battle going on between, the mainstream media just not wanting to anger him. And it's what I learned the phrase trading up in 2005. I'd never heard it, which is giving up one story to get a better one.
Yes.
And so ABC did this in 2005 with Cosby. They really didn't cover the allegations against him from Andrea Constand, except for one story they did, which was from a source that said that Bill Cosby's account of what happened was the same as Andrea's, except it differed only in that he said it was consensual and she said it was not. And sure, like, they interviewed Tamara Green, but never ran that interview. And sure enough, that May, they got the first exclusive TV sit down with Cosby, post these allegations, and got an exclusive inside look at one of his town halls, which at that point in time, he was crisscrossing the country, going into inner cities and having these town halls, as I viewed it, was just basically to lecture Black people about how to behave, which is just ironic in so many levels. So yeah, they got the exclusive with him, and the National Enquirer traded up too. Another accuser, Beth Ferrier, had come to them after seeing Andrea Constand's story, and they had her take a lie detector test, and they were ready to run it, but instead went to Cosby, and Cosby got them to kill that story and gave them an exclusive print interview. Not only did they kill Beth Ferrier's story, but they agreed to not write any negative stories about him for 2 years, having to do with relationships that outside his marriage, or drug, rape allegations, and that this agreement was subject to renewal in exchange for 2 year, like 2 exclusive interviews a year or something like that. So they really went all out to get this interview with Cosby. And he blasted Andrea Constand indirectly and Tamara Green. So yeah, trading up. It's much more common in the national media than it is in local media, I truly believe. Local media just tends to be more cautious about running stories. They're always worried about being sued.
Right.
And one could win a lawsuit, you spend a lot of money fighting it. And that's the greatest weapon that celebrities have in their arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, what a terrifying reality to learn this trading up, that's possible, and that he used that to suppress different points of view and truths on the matter. I am thinking of the story about his daughter with the Enquirer. Can you talk about that? And his daughter sounds like went through an addiction issue, and he offered that up as a story to squash something else.
Right. Yeah. So at one point, the New York Post had reported that the National Enquirer, like Cosby himself talked about this in some of his interviews, and I quote them in the book, that he actually preferred dealing with the media like the National Enquirer because they were what they were, whereas the mainstream media, he said, pretends to be something but is really just like the National Enquirer. So he would periodically cut deals with them to get them to back off of stories. And one time he did it when they were about to run a story about him and Sammy Davis Jr. hanging out with strippers or doing something with them in Vegas. So they killed that story. In exchange, he gave them a story about his daughter going into rehab for drug abuse.
That's right.
This is America's Dad now.
Right. And that's also, as I mentioned, the subtitle of your book, this wasn't just sort of like a colloquial assigned role. He was voted America's favorite dad. I mean, the resistance around believing that this could be true was so deep, it ran so deep. And I do wonder about the generational aspect of it. I had a guest on a couple of months ago, 2 guests who are millennials, young millennials, and we were talking about Anita Hill, and they both were born after the hearings against Clarence Thomas. So they say they live in a post-Anita Hill world. And what they meant by that was that they believe women. They believe anybody who comes forward with sexual assault until maybe proven otherwise, which we know is, very rare that there's false allegations of rape. So do you think part of that is a generational, we grew up with Bill Cosby, we're older, we're less open to that being a possibility?
I don't know. I think that my more take on it is if it's someone we like or identify with or whose politics we like, then we don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
If it's someone like a Donald Trump that someone you don't like, then you want to believe it. Because last year I saw this, I would love to know what those millennials think about the sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden, because last year when that woman came forward again and said what he had done to her in 1993, I never, like, until I investigate something myself, I do not have an opinion. That's my rule, because I would rather do my own investigations. However, I will say I listened to the podcast interview she did, and the emotion in her voice was gut-wrenching. It reminded me a lot of the Cosby survivors, but the media went after her with all they had, and there was actual corroboration for what she had to say. So I just still think that there is this sense out there that if you're accusing someone that the media likes or that the public likes, then people don't want to believe them still.
You're right. That's really, that's very challenging to sit with, but that's true. What do you think we can do to stop this deification of celebrities? And is cancel culture the answer, or is that too extreme as well?
Right. I think cancel culture has its value, but I even said this, in the height of the Me Too movement, it was was very concerning to me that people were losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods with no due process, no investigation, no anything, just like, boom, they were gone. I mean, cancel culture honestly helped with Cosby. And I do not think that he would have been sitting in a prison today had there not been social media and cancel culture and all of that. And so I think in some ways it can be good and it can override a celebrity's power. But I think like any kind of situation where people's livelihoods and freedom is at stake, that there needs to be due process. There needs to be some kind of impartial investigation. And what I, also saw with the Biden stuff is, one thing that I did in 2005 when the Cosby people were trotting out every bad thing like any survivor had done in order to discredit them, I would go to sexual assault experts and say, does this matter? Does this matter that this woman, got a DUI 8 years ago? And they're like, no, it doesn't matter. You can be a prostitute and still be raped. What matters is, any allegations about what she said happened to her in this situation. And then, but no one in the Biden stories with Tara Reid, they were interviewing sexual assault experts, but no one asked that question. Does any of this matter that she had financial troubles later? Does any of this have anything to do with what she says happened to her in 1993 with Joe Biden? And I'm sure they would have said, no, it does not, because that was the sexual assault is a sexual assault allegation. You can, and Tamara Green said during our Chasing Cosby live event, it was so true. Like, it's the only violent crime where you have to prove you're a perfect person in order to be believed.
Right.
But I would add that sometimes, and I write about this in the book, that, Andrea Constand was that perfect person. She didn't have a skeleton in her closet in 2005. So the Cosby team created lies about her and the media ran with it. So now, I would argue that doesn't even matter if it's a certain person. Bill Cosby still has millions of followers on social media. They're almost like, it's almost like a cult following. Yeah. I guarantee you most of them have never met him, but he still has this mythological power over them. So that's what women are up against when they come forward with someone like that. And it's really, really hard and takes a lot of courage to do that. Although I don't think Andrea really realized that when she decided to go to police. She just kept having nightmares that this was happening to someone else and it was her fault because she couldn't come forward. So that's why she finally went to police after a year.
Right. And a big part of your work is also presenting as much as facts about the case and following the crime, is presenting a more robust sort of 360 view, kind of integrated portrayal of the accusers, the victims, now survivors. How much was that top of mind when you started working on it versus like the journey of going into the story? Was it always really important to you that these people, once you could identify them, were shown to be fully human and show more about them in the story?
Well, yes, because I think that's key also when you're investigating some of these allegations. Who is this person that's making this allegation? Were they in a position to know this person? How? And like with Andrea, they didn't release her name at first in 2005, although subsequent to that, the media subsequently released her name and her photo without her permission, which you are not supposed to do with sexual assault victims. But the more I got her name from a source, and I was able to do a Nexus search and talk to people at Temple who knew her. And she just had this incredible background. I mean, she was one of the top basketball players in Canada, like the top 10, I think, in the entire country. In high school, she was recruited by 50 to 60 colleges in the US to play basketball for them, chose University of Arizona. She wanted to play for the WNBA and on her own dime went to try out for it, but didn't make it. So then she went to Europe and played for 18 years. And then when it became apparent that her dream of playing professional basketball was not going to happen, Dawn Staley, the women's basketball coach at Temple University in Philly, came to her and asked her to be director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple. And that's how she met Cosby, because Cosby was on the board of trustees. He was very close with Dawn Staley. She had pictures of the two of them together in her office. He had dedicated the Fat Albert Philly premiere of the movie to Dawn. So that's how she met him. A donor introduced them at a game and he became her mentor. She never viewed him as anything more than a grandfather figure. He was older than her own father. So I think victimology is very important, and because I think that the public knows who this celebrity is or who they think he is, but they have no idea who this woman is. So I think it's very important to flesh out who these women are that are accusing them, so that they can understand, and why they came forward. I feel like the podcast of Chasing Cosby changed a lot of minds too, because people got to hear directly from the survivors themselves and let them tell their stories. And you can just hear that raw emotion in their voice.
I am so excited to share with you that She's Birdie is back. She's Birdie is a modern personal safety alarm, and what better season to fit into than this one? We have been talking about personal safety, stories of surviving, and I don't know about you, but anything I can do to feel safer at this point, I'm going to try. So I have a birdie alarm. I actually have several. My family members have them. I give them as gifts. In fact, my daughter graduates from high school on Friday, and all of her friends going to college, boys included, are getting a She's Birdie. If you're feeling uncertain, unsafe, or if you're threatened, you can activate Birdie's loud alarm. It's a 130 decibel siren and a flashing strobe light, which creates a diversion. It's also very cute. It comes in 5 colors, each with a solid brass keychain that you can put on your bag, your keys, your dog leash. I know a lot of women like to hike and run with them. My favorite part about Birdie is that it doesn't go off if you don't want it to. It's rolling around my bag. It's being tossed under the counter with my keys. It doesn't go off. And yet, I've practiced. When I want it to, it's really easy to use. I'm actually an ambassador for She's Birdie, and it's because I stand behind their social mission. Birdie is committed to creating a world where women's safety is a given. They believe every person has the right to feel safe and are focusing on women as a place to start. Their impassioned community is engaging conversations between men and women, educating and giving. For every alarm purchased, Birdie gives 5% of profits to a partnering organization that passionately support women's safety, shelter, and health. So if you want to try She's Birdie, go to shesbirdie.com, and when you're ready to purchase, use the code DIEHARD, DIEHARD, for 10% off your Birdie. That's DIEHARD, and you can shop at shesbirdie.com. The link will be in the show notes. Yeah, exactly. And I think it really works towards helping anybody who's still kind of thinking, why did it take so long? You know, these normal, or not normal, they've become normal reactions to after the fact allegations years later. Why did it take so long? If it was so bad, why didn't they go to the police or tell anybody? You know, the more victims are brave enough, survivors, to speak out, it works against that narrative. This is so damaging. The trauma is real. Many of them suffered long-term effects from these experiences. And I think all told, is it around 60 women that were across, the trials and the civil cases? Is it 60 accusers and survivors?
60 plus. So yeah. And even back in 2005, there were 14 women accusing Cosby back then. The DA just made it clear almost from the get-go he didn't want to charge Cosby. And so yes, when this all exploded again in 2014, even more women started coming forward. And the big difference between 2014 and 2005 is that the media now was covering the allegations of these women, and they were, I wouldn't say sympathetic, but they were hearing them out and they were giving them a platform, where in 2005, if they did get a platform, they were ridiculed and they were dismissed. And, if you want to take a look at what that was like in 2005, I tell anyone, go to my website and look at my video interviews from 2005. There's one where I'm on with Tamara, and you can listen to part of the Matt Lauer one Tamara did in 2005, where he's just openly skeptical of what she's saying and very hostile to her. So I think that was a big difference. And then, but still these women were getting criticized and blasted. So more and more women started coming forward to support the women who already had. But I think the actual number is well into the hundreds.
Wow.
It's 60 plus, dating back to 1965. And each woman I know knows of several other women it happened to. So yeah, I think there's many, many, many more.
Wow. The tide shift in media coverage is interesting to think about Matt Lauer and then what we later learn about him. Do you see a shift in the sensitivity around topics addressed, even when there's no criminal aspect, but just this lack of boundaries around certain things? I just sometimes cringe when I watch old interviews.
I would have said yes a year and a half ago, but like I said, after watching the way Tara Reid was torn to shreds by the media, a year and a half ago, I don't think that's the case. I think that it's still, even Alyssa Milano, I believe all women, well, except if you're accusing someone I like. She's, her hashtag got everything going, really got the Me Too movement to take off, and she she didn't believe all women this time. So, I still think it's someone the media likes, or, the other thing was they hated Trump. So that was the other reason for not really reporting on these allegations. So no, I was tweeting about it because I was just like, oh my God, this is so deja vu to me. Just beloved public figure gets accused of something and the rest of the media just refuses to believe it.
It's almost like the tide is shifting when it's convenient to the dominant narrative.
Right. And, I try to examine in the book too, why is there this inherent distrust of sexual assault victim claims, unlike with any other crime? And I do kind of address that because it's there. And I also try to dispel rape myths in there, because the sexual assault expert who testified at the second Cosby trial testified first, which was different from the first trial. And she she dispelled rape myths one after one. 85% of sexual assault victims know they're a rapist. Most sexual assault victims never come forward. And the ones that do, there's a delay in reporting. They don't go immediately. And, and they sometimes have contact with them afterward. They're trying to normalize the situation. So I wanted to examine all of that in the book, because this is definitely true. Like, there's just this inherent suspicion of anyone who claims this. And, some will say, oh, they wanted to get famous. And I'm thinking, who wants to be famous for being raped?
Yeah.
And I think that also, why would you come forward when you see what happens to you? That's why some of these women in 2005 were Jane Does. I didn't know their names till more than a decade later, because they saw what was happening with Tamara Green and Andrea Constand, and they did not want their names made public for that very reason. And I cannot blame them. So the question is, instead of the question of, why didn't you come forward? The question I think should be, why would you come forward? Because look what happens to you when you do, if you accuse someone who's beloved and powerful like Bill Cosby.
Yeah, and maybe we'll move into a space of, the next question being, how can we make it safer for people to come forward? That's got to be the next shift. You referenced the second trial, and I know this is your work in the book is, the definitive guide to the Cosby crimes, trials, and survivors. But could you give an overview of the two criminal trial outcomes and then the civil case or cases?
Sure. Andrea Constand settled her civil lawsuit with Cosby in 2006. She was the only one to file one. The other women, the 12 other women were witnesses. They were Jane Doe witnesses. They did not have lawsuits of their own. And then when all of this bubbled up again in 2014 and Cosby's team went out there attacking the women again, then Tamara Green and later 6 other survivors filed defamation lawsuits against Cosby for the things they were saying about them, and subsequently settled out of court with him for those. And Cosby was criminally charged in 2015 in December. And the first trial was in June of 2017, and it was a hung jury. It was a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree. And so there was a retrial in April of 2018. And this time it was a different jury. The other jury had been brought in from Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, across the state. This crime happened in Montgomery County, right outside Philly, where Cosby owns a home. So this jury was from Montgomery County. And there was one 81-year-old on the first jury who, his whole perspective was, why was Andrea Constand going over there with her midriff showing,
Yikes.
Generational view of things. And I think they shied away from much older, tried to not have as many anyone in that age group on this particular jury. But it was a great jury. And, I never really thought about the fact too, that no one tells a jury how to deliberate. They tell you, here are your rules. They give the jury instructions, but they never say, go in that room and here's what you do. And so the first jury, I think, gathering from all the stories I read, I think they just started voting initially. And that's where there were a lot of fights. There were fists flying. There were people punching walls. One person who quit smoking, started smoking again. And finally, after like 50 some hours of deliberations, they just couldn't reach a verdict. But this one was much more methodical the way it was described to me. And they didn't want to vote at first. They wanted to just first kind of talk things through because they weren't allowed to talk about the case while they were sequestered. And then, they wanted to go through witness by witness and say who they found credible and who they didn't. And, unilaterally, they found Andrea Constand credible. And in Pennsylvania, you can convict in a sexual assault case just based on believing the sexual assault victim. So I think that was the big key. I mean, there were 5 other victims who testified, But I truly think that between the sexual assault expert's testimony and Andrea herself, that was enough to convict.
Right. And so what are his chances of appeal? He's in prison now. Does he have any appeals left? Or that I would imagine his team is appealing?
Yes. So he was, believe it or not, it'll be 3 years in September since he was convicted, and he was up for parole. It just got denied because he, of course, is still maintaining his innocence, and he was designated a sexually violent predator and is supposed to be undergoing treatment and going to these classes, and he's refusing to go. So the board denied him parole. And he has an appeal before the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court based on 2 issues that they agreed to hear and held oral arguments on in December. One, that parts of his deposition should not have been used in the criminal trial, the deposition in Andrew's criminal case, and also the use of these, they're called 404B witnesses, these so-called 404B witnesses, the 5 other women who testified, whether they should have been allowed to testify. And the thing is, in Pennsylvania, those type of witnesses are allowed, but they've got to show the probative versus the prejudicial value. And no one ever said, no judge, because I remember being at these hearings and the judge was trying to find out, has there ever been any ruling on how many is too many, how many you should allow, how far back in time? There was none of that. So that's why I'm not surprised they decided to hear the case based on that. But the remedy is not exoneration. The remedy is, first of all, it could just uphold the conviction and say these witnesses shouldn't have been allowed. But the other thing is the remedy is a new trial. So there is a possibility of a 3rd trial. I think,
wow.
I watched the oral arguments and I was almost dismayed at the way that the state Supreme Court justices were questioning the prosecutors, and they were very aggressive and very, I don't know, I kind of wondered if they were all Cosby Show fans, because
oh my gosh,
they clearly just were not in the, buying what the prosecution was saying. It was very hostile. And at one point, the chief judge walked off for 10 minutes, just walked off blank in the middle of the prosecutor answering a question he had.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you can probably still find it online. I was watching it just going, oh my God. So I don't really think that they're going to rule in the favor of the prosecution here, but maybe that's just what they do. I don't know, but it didn't seem like it.
Wow. I can't believe there's even the chance of another trial. And of this 5 women that were witnesses, didn't they just have to select 5 out of the possible 14 or something? Or was that the first trial?
Yeah, no, the first trial, the DA wanted 13 to testify and the judge allowed trial. The prosecution asked for 19 to testify and the judge allowed 5, but said that the 5 had to be from 1982 on. It couldn't be anyone before 1982, and that they could choose those 5. Wow. So that's how that worked for the second trial.
Okay. And then before we move on to the next story, the statute of limitations, does that vary state to state?
Yes. And, there's no federal sexual assault charge unless it occurs, on federal property.
Okay.
But yes, it varies state by state. And one thing the Cosby survivors did after the case bubbled up again in 2014 is they got the statute of limitations for sexual assault eliminated or extended in Colorado, Nevada, and California.
Oh, good.
So still working, and in some cases, like in Colorado, they initially got it extended. Now they're working on getting it completely eliminated. California, they got it eliminated. In Nevada, they got it extended. Now they're working on getting it eliminated. So they really tried to use the platform this gave them to help other sexual assault survivors, because it didn't help them. There was
right.
Not like grandfathered in their own sexual assaults. It was just to help future victims.
That's incredibly generous of them to, continue the fight when they have no gain from that. I'm really happy to hear that. So moving on to, another story where there are parallels in that people are traumatized and victimized and then re-traumatized through what happens in the legal and criminal proceedings. But it's a really different story. It's called Victim F. The book just came out this month in June. The story of Aaron Quinn and Denise Huskins, a couple with a complicated kind of past. Denise is kidnapped from Aaron's home, and we'll get into the rest, but I'm curious how you got involved to co-author this book with them.
Sure. And I'd heard of this case when it happened. I remembered it. I remember the Gone Girl part, how they called her that, but I was in California and I was with People then, and our LA bureau was handling it, so I didn't cover it. At the time, the agent I had at the time connected me with them because someone had come to her with them and they really wanted to write a book, but they needed a co-author because, you know, it's hard enough to write narrative nonfiction on your own, but then to try to do a whole book and, you know, you usually need someone to help you with that. So that's how I got connected with them. And I was immediately drawn to it because, you know, once I left People in 2017, that I decided that projects I wanted to tackle were only ones I was very passionate about. You know, obviously I have bills to pay, so I've got to do things to, you know, make a living too. But if I was, you know, gonna tackle something like a book, I really wanted it to be with a project that I felt passionate about. And, you know, that this certainly fit that bill. I could not believe what happened to Aaron and Denise. And the home invasion and kidnapping and rape are horrible enough, but it's what happened afterward that what just makes it go into the realm of unbelievable and just outrageous because, you know, the police held a press conference calling the whole thing a hoax, and Denise was called a real life Gone Girl in headlines all over the world. And it was just, you know, their lives were completely shattered by this and they did nothing wrong. They were victims.
I know. And yet the story, the details are so, I mean, we were talking earlier about the likelihood of you being assaulted or raped by someone you know is far greater than this outside intruder. So we kind of know that now. So this whole premise does seem cinematic and fictional. It's crazy. And yet it really happened. But they're not given any benefit of the doubt. Aaron is treated as a suspect right out of the gate. Denise is also scrutinized and put through the ringer after enduring, I mean, honestly, one of the worst stories of an assault that I've heard. They both are victims. And what I found so interesting, I actually listened to it on Audible. I didn't read it a hard copy. I listened on Audible. So it goes back and forth between Denise and Aaron's perspectives of the whole crime unfolding. Even though I knew Aaron was a victim in the story, I was getting frustrated and also was holding on to some weird skepticism around him. Like, what's the point where we're going to find out he really was involved? Because we do hold on to this, you know, the husband or the boyfriend always does it narrative. So he was victimized in his own way. What did the story teach you, and what has your work taught you about gender and victim profiling? Are we less likely to believe a man?
You know, to me, it's more about police tunnel vision. And, you know, what is frustrating about these cases is the police, you know, sure, in most cases, it is the husband or the boyfriend, right? You know, you should, just like a reporter should go into every story with an open mind, police should go into every crime with an open mind and stop using, you know, their preconceived notions about how these crimes usually play out. Because if they had not had tunnel vision, they would have seen in Aaron's house all of the proof that he was telling the truth. There was the camera that the kidnappers had put up. There was the zip ties. There were the red tape and everything they put up all over the house. There was the broken screen. Like, really, he's supposed to be doing all of this in these hours since the drugs. He was drugged. You know, if they had spent time actually looking at the evidence instead of looking inside their own heads at what they thought had happened, then the whole thing could have been avoided. You know, they could have been the heroes in this case. But look at like the Jeffrey McDonald case. It's the same thing. There were 4 intruders, and to this day, I do believe he's innocent. How can you make up it? But it was bizarre. That's the thing here. Oh, it's such a bizarre story. Well, that's not their fault. The story, The Fugitive, Dr. Sam Shepard, he said a one-armed man, you know, killed his wife and he went on the run. It turned out it was that for the person who did that. Sure, that's an unusual story, but the other thing is, why would you make up something like that? A weird story if you're trying to get away with it. You'd make up something not outlandish. You'd make up something more normal, like she ran off with her. That's some of the ones I've covered where I think the husband did it. Oh, she ran away. And like Drew Peterson, I don't know where she went. Wife number 4 just vanishes and she was going to divorce him. Make up something outlandish. I mean, that is just going to draw attention to it. You'd make up something more normal. But still, journalists do this and police do this. They don't go into these cases with an open mind. And that's what's so harmful, because the media was just as bad in this case as it was in the Andrea Constand, Bill Cosby case too. The behavior was outrageous.
I do think, you know, it's a complicated story to get right. It would be a really risky one to use, right? If you had to cover up a crime, it would be so messy and hard to keep track of.
And when you lawyer up, if you're guilty, why would Aaron willingly go to the police station and spend 18 hours there trying to convince them what happened and subject himself to all he did? You know, meanwhile, all the emails from the kidnappers are still coming in and open them. His phone, which they were supposed to call him on, was on airplane mode, he found out. And the kidnappers did call 3 times to set up, getting the ransom and dropping Denise off. And the police just ignored it. So there was all this evidence right in front of them that they just chose to ignore. And I think, and Aaron writes a little bit about this, his part in the book where he talks about what it's like, his perspective, not just on the not being believed, but just he was a victim too, it was a home.
Yes.
Can you imagine how terrifying it is to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with armed intruders in your room and a strobe light and the dancing dots? And can you imagine that?
No, and also in addition to that, he bears the responsibility of the decision that will obviously directly impact Denise's safety of calling the police or not, or going through with the instructions. I think the weight of that responsibility is beyond comprehension. I would never want to have that decision to make on my hands for someone I loved, for their safety. But in addition to him not being believed, the other theme I think this story brings up is this one of, trusting the police. And Aaron is they both are accomplished professionals. And they had this, he even says explicitly, I knew I should probably get a lawyer and that would be sort of what you're supposed to do. And yet I was so desperate to find Denise. I just was like, sure, let me help. Let's get this going. So he agrees to a polygraph, but he's under such stress, lack of sleep, drugs, etc. He fails it. So you start to see just things falling apart right from the get-go. And I think people who are into true crime tend to veer on the side of always get a lawyer, and their families. I thought this was interesting. Their families were pretty compliant with the police, patient, waiting. And if his brother had never asked for a lawyer, I don't know how much longer it would have taken for him to finally get some representation. What is your advice to people? And I can imagine it's get a lawyer, but what do you think? I think this can teach people so much about, unfortunately, not mistrusting the police, but protecting yourself.
Well, I'll correct something first, because the FBI told him he failed the lie detector test. And no one's ever seen the results. And the affidavit that came out later, it just said it was inconclusive.
Oh, okay.
It may have been it was probably just another tactic they used to try to get him to confess to something he didn't do.
Wow.
Because that's what went on from there, was the FBI agent trying to get him to confess, just like he did. And, this also highlighted a very troubled police department, the Vallejo Police Department, where I think that their police-involved shootings rate is like 28 times the national average. There have been millions of dollars in lawsuits by unarmed people that they shot. So it also, there's something really deeply dysfunctional in that Vallejo Police Department that still exists today.
Yeah.
And if they can go after people like Aaron and Denise, then what chance does the average person have?
Exactly.
So interesting is Aaron's very smart. He's very capable. He's got a doctorate. He's a very logical guy. He's not an emotional guy.
Right.
But there's a point in that interrogation with Mustard, the Vallejo cop, where, he's battering away at him. And then he just goes, now, if you told this story to 12 people, they wouldn't believe it. If you told this to your friends, they wouldn't believe it, would you? And Aaron just meekly goes, no. And then he catches himself as we're writing the book. He's like, wait a second. Of course my friends would believe me. They know I would have something like this. But you see him start to get beaten down by the interrogation techniques. So it's just sad. And this is why there are so many false confessions out there today.
I was just going to say, this helps, paint the picture of how exactly it happens. You are worn down to where you almost stop trusting yourself. Even a person with a strong sense of self and, identity and family and friends can really start to question things, and is really scary to hear it happen in real time from his perspective.
And you want it to be over. And that was the
right.
Aaron knew he couldn't call the police initially because the kidnapper said they were monitoring his phone. So he called his brother, who's an FBI agent. And then Ethan, was like, you got to call 911. So he did. And then because he figured, well, they're probably not monitoring my phone now because they haven't done anything. So he did. And then, Ethan followed him and went to the police station. And, there was a lot of the discussion among his family, like, should he get a lawyer? Should he get a lawyer? But, and Ethan to this day regrets not, and Ethan is a lawyer, like he passed the bar, then he became an FBI agent. He to this day regrets not getting Aaron a lawyer because he figured like none of the rest would have happened had Aaron had a lawyer from day one. But Aaron's philosophy, well, look, I'm telling the truth, first of all.
Yeah.
So I need their help to find Denise. And that's all he wanted. And that's why he kept cooperating. He was in a horrible horrible position that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
Same. Can you talk a little bit about who we find out is for this crime, to the extent that we do?
Yeah, and let me tell you, there was a hero cop in this story too, Misty. Yes, 3 months later, she's investigating a home invasion in Dublin, California, where she oversees, and the lead suspect in that is a man named Matthew Mueller, who was living at his parents' vacation home in South Lake Tahoe. So he ends up being charged with Aaron and Denise's crime just through the extraordinary detective work Misty did, because she didn't need to do everything that she did. She had enough evidence to tie him to her crime. She didn't need to go above and beyond like she did, but she saw, and this is what the kidnappers gave Aaron and Denise, was blacked out swim goggles. And one of the things they found at Matthew Mueller's place were blacked out swim goggles. And then she saw one with a long blonde hair hanging from it. And she knew no one in her case had long blonde hair. And she just thought, oh my God, there's another victim out there. Mm-hmm. And so she just persevered until she, did all this investigating and found out about the crime that Aaron and Denise had been victims of. And she ends up solving it. But his accomplices, because they know there were 2 other people there that night, have still never been charged. And once again, they're being gaslit by law enforcement who say, oh no, he acted alone, with virtually, no proof of that. And it's a crazy case. I mean, that's why it's almost too much to try to explain, because the
yes.
actually came to their defense and sent these emails to law enforcement after the police held a news conference saying the whole thing was a hoax. And although they found a lot of the equipment and everything in Mueller's, they've never, as far as we know, found the emails. These were like 9,000 word manifestos giving details of all the crimes they committed that were all verified had happened on Mare Island, where Aaron lived outside San Francisco.
Wow. Yeah, it really is so much to get your head around. And I highly recommend the book, especially because you do get these very intimate perspectives from both Aaron and Denise. It's truly a riveting read, so people can learn much more about the case. So I have to ask, what are you digging into right now? If you can say, is there a story you're working on?
Yes, I'm working on a book proposal for, it's another co-authoring. I can't really say more until we find out if we get a deal, but it's another case where there's extraordinary police work and there is not so extraordinary police work. And it's a case where there's been a lot of misinformation out there in the press too. So it's one, I think, but these ones involve murders. Well, I can't anything. I actually have an NDA on it.
Yep. Understood. Color us intrigued. We'll look for more information when it's time. But thank you so much for sharing these stories. I will point everyone to both books and the podcast, which gives, really another intimate survivor perspective. But before I let you go, Nicki, I do ask all my guests, what gets you up in the morning?
Well, of course, everything I have in my home with my husband and my animals and all. But what gets me going is where I can really dig into a story and hopefully right a wrong and uncover injustice and hopefully get some justice for the people involved in it, or at least give them the ability to tell their side of the story in a forum that is friendly. I only say friendly is because co-authoring, by the very nature of it, you're working with them. But I also would not take on a project I did not believe in. So I would not co-author a book or anything like that if I didn't believe that the truth of the story that I'm writing.
Right.
So,
well, thanks for doing the work you do the way you do it. You proved just to have endless amounts of integrity in this when it was probably nerve-wracking, as you said. So thank you. And we can't wait to see what else you do. Thank you for being on Dialogue.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dialogue is a Yellowtape Media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebecca Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to Dialogue, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation.